Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sync Up Podcast, your one-stop shop for all things OneDrive. OneDrive is the home for all of the files that you care about most, and we are here to take you behind the scenes to get the insights and the knowledge to make your experience and your users' experience better. My name is Stephen Rice. I'm a principal product manager here on the OneDrive team, and as always, I am joined by my fellow OneDrive aficionado, Arvind Mishra.
Hey, everyone. I'm Arvind, and I'm also a principal product manager on the OneDrive team. We have a very special guest today. Today, we are joined by one of Microsoft's very own, the IT pro, David Johnson. Welcome, David.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here. Please tell our listening audience a little bit about yourself and how you became the IT pro of Microsoft.
So I am the principal product manager architect for the Microsoft tenant. And so how does Microsoft manage and govern our Microsoft 365 data estate, the set of services we run for our own employees? Like any customer, we're dealing with our own tenant. How do we manage that? That's really what I do I have a large team around me that actually runs all the services. My job is to make sure we can govern it all, think about how the pieces fit together. How do we onboard? How do we deal with the sprawl problem? How do we do manage all the assets? How do we do it for a change? Like those are all things that I deal with. And so I'm in the organization at Microsoft that is called Microsoft Digital. We are the organization that is effectively, you might think of us as Microsoft IT.
Cool. Did you grow up wanting to do this, or how did you arrive in your role, David?
I came through in some ways when I jumped into SharePoint in roughly 2004, 2005, and I led how Microsoft builds our internal portals on SharePoint, everything from our corporate portals and IT portals, and how do we enable self-service, things like SharePoint itself. So I grew up effectively in this lens from a SharePoint-focused perspective on-prem, moved into the whole initiative to move to cloud, took that on, and then over time, of course, had to take on the broader stack. It was no longer just SharePoint. It really is this broader suite called Microsoft 365. And so, it's a grow up story effectively.
And now a word from our sponsor.
Hey there, Microsoft 365 fans. Have you heard the buzz? The Microsoft 365 Community Conference is coming to Las Vegas, May 6th to 8th, 2025, and you do not want to miss it.
Picture this: over 200 sessions, mind-blowing keynotes, hands-on workshops, and even AMAs where you can pick the brains of top Microsoft experts and community leaders, probably execs too. Whether you're an IT pro, a developer, or business user, this event, it's got something for everyone.
This is your chance to learn, network, level up your skills, all while hanging out with the vibrant Microsoft 365 community. And as I mentioned, it is happening in Las Vegas, because who doesn't love a little bit of work and play in the city that never sleeps?
If you register now, you'll save $150 with the promo code SAVE150. Save 150. But don't wait too long, because this early bird offer, well, it's not going to last forever.
Head over to aka.ms/M365Con25 to learn more and grab your ticket today.
So mark your calendar for May 6th through May 8th, 2025, and we'll see you at the Microsoft 365 Community Conference in Vegas. It's going to be epic.
And now, back to the show. I have to imagine, David, you work inside of Microsoft. So clearly, Microsoft IT has never had any issues whatsoever working with Microsoft product groups. It's all one big happy family.
Well, and I think that the interesting thing for us, of course, is we're what we call ourselves customer zero of ourselves. So we're going to get things before our customers do. We're in a ring fighting, trying things out. Sometimes things aren't quite baked yet. Sometimes we're working through kinks that are interesting. Sometimes we've got to figure out how do we manage something that is not yet built as a manageable thing. Never happens. So those are all things that we often do that are a little bit ahead of our customers. And so in many cases, the learnings we try to share. We've got something called Inside Track, where we try to share our knowledge with customers or how Microsoft runs Microsoft and how can people emulate us.
It's always a fun exercise. I know when Arvind and I were working on some new feature, let's get that rolled out inside of Microsoft. We want to test it. We want to play with it. And then there's that moment of wait, how many people does Microsoft have in its tenant right now? And I don't even remember what the number. It's
roughly 300,000 licensed accounts. And when you think of Microsoft, we also work with guests. Like our model is roughly 600,000 guests because our model is actually really important with OneDrive, where we would rather the employee bring the person external in and work on the content on our services so we can manage it, protect it, audit it, revoke access if we need to, all the rest, versus risk that file leaving our tenant and going who knows where.
I'm just curious, like if you can anecdotally share with the audience, like maybe something that has ever gone disastrously wrong with any of our rollouts, and you can make this as humorous as you want, or as I don't know, maybe not as humorous as it were. Well, we can all laugh about things in the past.
Well, yeah, I think just getting the cloud, like when we first went to Microsoft 3, SharePoint Online at first, right? Mm-hmm. You're thinking of a time. The scale differential. We had what? So when we started moving from prem, we were like 36 terabytes of content. Mm-hmm. We have, now X number of petabytes. I forget the current number, 8 or 9. I forget where we're currently at. But point is that we're just massive. And so when you think about that transition, just moving to cloud, and at the time it's like you had limits of how many sites you could even have when you first went to SharePoint Online. And that gets interesting fast when you want to empower your employees, and it's been our model. Yet the service isn't quite ready for that. And so we kind of pushed the envelope on how do we light up and let employees do things, and how do you actually scale to handle the end result without tipping over the company. The other thing for us was, simply funny stories of, as products roll out and we have these new communication portal constructs, how does it scale? So when our CEO sends out an all company email linking to SharePoint, does it tip over? It doesn't anymore.
Yeah. Those are always the fun things is, we're building a feature, we think we're ready, and then we immediately have to deploy it to one of our largest customers. I mean, the example that always comes to mind for me, Arvind, is I think it's the Bedlam incident. Famous now.
Yeah. Tell me about this. I don't think I know about this.
How do I know about this, but you don't?
I maybe I know of it under a different name. What please?
So this was a Exchange server, I believe. Yeah, someone had created test groups for Microsoft users internally. So there was like Bedlam 1, Bedlam 2, Bedlam 3, Bedlam 4, whatever, and they just added a bunch of people into these distribution lists. And people being people, someone saw like, hey, I'm part of this Bedlam 3 group. I don't know what this is. And they typed an email to Bedlam 3, which is, I don't remember what it was, 20,000 people, whatever, and said, hey, I don't know what this is. Please remove me from this group. And so that sent out an email to say 20,000 people. And then some number of auto replies came back. And someone else was like, oh, I also don't know what this is. Reply all. Please remove me from this group. It took down Microsoft's email for, I think, a couple of days until...
Well, yeah, because we had massive, failures going on, cascading, because mail after mail after mail, everyone was responding to it, and it just became this, it was bedlam.
Wow. So, David, I'm sure you've learned a lot since you sent that original email. So I'm
I wasn't even involved, but yeah, so it's just amusing.
I'm totally getting.
Yeah, no, I get it. The stories I've been involved in are just how do we deal with the SharePoint management and migration, and all those stories are how do we rethink our portals and all the rest of it. So move to cloud was a big thing for us.
Let's dive into kind of our main topic, which we kind of already started talking about, but it is how Microsoft thinks about IT, particularly thinking about OneDrive and SharePoint file management inside of the service. So to start with, David, what are the things that, as you are approaching this problem space, like what do you worry about? What are the things that keep you up at night you want to make sure we have a solution for?
And I think about this in the lens of like what a lot of customers tell me they think about too. Of one, how do I deal with evergreen? Well, these are live services. They change all the time. How do I keep up with change? How do I determine what I want to do with these services? What my configuration changes? What's the impact? Mm-hmm. I have new sharing link options. I have new storage options. I have this thing called SharePoint Embedded behind Loop. What does it actually mean? How do I think about it? How do I manage it? Those are all things that we have to think about. And, then I have to think about the asset management and protection, especially in the age of AI. When you think about data hygiene being really critical, if people have access to stuff, AI is just going to, Copilot is just going to reason over everything that people have access to. Should it even exist of a tenant? How do I manage sprawl and make sure my tenant is manageable? Like any customer, I think about quota management. Am I going to be dealing with that or worrying about it at all? Like those are all things that as a customer I'm thinking about. So I've got things like lifecycle management. How do I protect my data to make sure that people who shouldn't have access to data don't? Those are all things that we think about and kind of keep us up at night. And we want to make sure, of course, we don't have some accidental incident because someone did something totally by accident that shared something about the next generation, whatever.
Mhm. I'm curious, like there was a lot of stuff in there that you mentioned. I tend to think in terms of user experience because that's just my background. Is there a right way or a wrong way to like roll out features to minimize like employee pushback? Because I understand, like, we're sitting at Microsoft, we like to think of ourselves at the tip of the spear of technology. We try to like build a lot of cool things. We like to use a lot of cool things, but like our customers, maybe like don't think of technology in the same way we do often. What are some good ways for us to minimize pushback from your experience?
Well, I think part of it is what is your strategy for who you're rolling things out to first?
Okay.
In many cases where we can, we try to isolate change and go, you know what, we're going to roll this out to what we call our elite people, people that are more comfortable with IT, with change and risk, and they want to basically be the cool kids. They want to try the new stuff first, right? And so we try to roll things out to the audiences that are going to give us the most feedback. They want to be engaged. They're willing to suffer some pain in some cases, and we try to do the things like that first. That gives us learning about what does change management look like. It gives us feedback on what have we experienced, what kind of collateral do we need to put up on our IT portal, what we call Tech Web, so we can make sure employees are aware of what's going on, and we kind of get that feedback early.
Gotcha. Like launching it to a safe audience effectively.
Exactly. Launching it to a safe audience is a great way to think about it. And quite frankly, the better capabilities are, but let us kind of effectively ring fence. And I love it when capabilities just say, you know what, I can target this to a given security group and turn it on. And that security group now has access to this thing, and I don't impact the rest of the company, right? And that this lets me try things out. We get comfortable for IT. Our employees get comfortable to try it out. They give us feedback. We get to make sure that the right messaging goes out after everybody else.
What is the kind of philosophy that you and Microsoft IT uses when you think about the role of IT in the organization? Like, how do you think about users' responsibilities, IT's responsibilities, and keeping that in a healthy balance?
And that's a great question, because for us, we're kind of an interesting position of we're trying to do multiple things. Like any customer, we've got to secure and protect ourselves. We've got to be legally compliant in every country we operate in. We have to make sure we deal with the scale, the IT manageability. So like every customer, we're like that. But one of the things we think about that's really important for us is that I call it empower with guardrails, self-service with guardrails. Our critical focus is I would rather IT get out of employees' way. I want you to create that site, share that file, go create a team, accomplish your purpose, and not have to get IT involved in the process. And that for us is a kind of a fundamental guiding principle for us, is that self-service with guardrails means I'm letting people do things. I'm letting people create things. That's why even when I say bring guests in, I let a full-time employee bring in guests and a tenant. That's not something some customers do, and because customers are afraid of it. But when you really analyze the problem, you realize actually it's safer in many ways than letting the data just leave and go who knows where. And so we thought about this. And so that whole self-service with guardrails means we're, on the one hand, empowering employees. We're also going to hold them accountable to their actions. That I let you do something. I've trained you. Every employee is trained. We go through security training. We go through annual standards of business conduct training. Every employee has to do this stuff. And then from there, of course, I'm going to hold you accountable to what you've done. And of course, I can audit all that stuff. I can deal from a compliance perspective as I need to. And I'll talk about labeling a little bit later, but we can do a trust but verify model to make sure people are getting it right.
Definitely. So let's start with, how do you approach new features that are rolling out? So most customers obviously will see something in Message Center, shows up, they now have to make a plan. Obviously, Microsoft IT is a little bit different because you don't necessarily get the Message Center post, because often features start a little bit earlier. But how is it that Microsoft approaches new features and thinks about those things?
I kind of think of it in a proactive way and a reactive way. Proactive is where we're engaged. We've seen the roadmap. We know what's coming. We're able to start getting involved. We may ask questions, just like a customer in a TAP program can ask questions and get involved in early feedback, early iteration. We're doing the same thing in many of these cases, trying to get upstream and be prepared for it and get feedback early on what that thing is. But then, like every customer, that reactive, that most things we're not going to have early warning for. We're not going to know. We're going to catch a Message Center too. And again, that's where we're kind of reacting to changes. And so we have both models that we're dealing with from a tenant standpoint. And we kind of, I think we're trying to mature ourselves more and more to be more upstream and more proactive about the changes that are coming. But I mean, as it like anything, there's just a lot when you're dealing with a service of the scale of Microsoft 365.
Absolutely. Well, let's maybe see if there's a practical example. Could be last 2 years, a change around OneDrive or SharePoint files, whatever it might have been, that you can you use it as an example of how Microsoft tackles this sort of change?
Well, I think a Loop for me is a good one, right? Where Loop is a whole new storage model, and effectively it's SharePoint embedded behind the scenes, right? But it's a whole new way to think about what are you actually managing? What are the employee experiences with Loop? What does your sharing model look like with Loop? How do I protect Loop? Like that was a good example where we had to think it through, because not only you're dealing with a new set of experiences, but you're also dealing with a whole new set of effectively a storage model. SharePoint embedded was new for us to think about. We didn't have that before. And again, it's all on the same share. The good thing was, and this is actually the reason why Loop didn't scare us too much, we get all the benefit from the SharePoint OneDrive foundation that, you know what, I've got DLP, I've got e-discovery, I got retention, it's all there.
Yeah, definitely always a benefit.
I maybe want to switch topics a little bit and talk about something that I have challenges with, and certainly a manager would say I have challenges with it as well, because she's always reminding me, hey, can you please put this file in the right place?
Oh, Arvind, you get those emails too? I get those.
Yes, I totally do. Okay, so I know what I do. I'm sure it's not what I'm supposed to do, but like, can you talk about, because there's a common question from customers as well, file management versus shared ownership. Where should people put it? People put their stuff in their OneDrive. People put stuff in, some people put stuff in SharePoints. Like, do we have guidance internally? Like, what? How should we be doing it, or how should I be working, David? Please.
Yeah, no, it's a great topic. And the first thing I mention is, first of all, everything that's on your device should be replicated to the cloud. You know, OneDrive for Business is the primary for your device. All my stuff effectively should be there. I shouldn't have anything that's just local. You know, for us as IT, that is where I start. I want to make sure I don't have content that's stranded on a device. If I have a ransomware attack on the device or anything else, I want to be able to recover. So I start there. OneDrive is critical for that, the foundation, all my stuff. But then, yeah, I need the sites for the team stuff. And that goes back to encouragement of, look, that's one of the reasons why we tell employees to go create a new team. I'd rather you go create a new team, go create a new site and location for your shared experiences, because it's better than doing nesting and breakaway permissions and folders that potentially get confusing, and people get permissions wrong and they overshare, they overexpose. By letting people build more sites and more experiences, you know, we have 700,000 SharePoint sites in Microsoft today, roughly. And that seems like a lot, but when you think of a volume of employees and projects and varieties, it actually isn't so much over time. And we have pretty good lifecycle management to keep it clean. So for us, that's how we kind of think about it. We let employees create. Now, the default save, of course, is OneDrive for Business, because, of course, where else are you going to put it? And the default, of course, for all devices is replicate to OneDrive for Business. So that's, again, why the foundation. But anything shared, anything your team or project should be in a site somewhere.
Gotcha. Okay. So even if I'm working on something I'm collaborating on, like with a document or something, starts in my OneDrive, you know, the goal should be to move it to a team site at some point.
Exactly. And that's the whole point. It's kind of a grow up story, because you think about something in the life cycle of the document, right? Sometimes you want to start something, you're not quite ready to share it. You're just iterating and experimenting with some thoughts. Then you're going to move it into a SharePoint site when you're a little more ready. Of course, share something directly from my OneDrive and when a couple people just to try things out, get some early feedback. But then, you know, if the work should really be in a site for lots of reasons. Like, your team is going to be defined it. They're all working together on one thing. You've got a membership that you know exists. You know, if a person's going to leave a company, well, the data is going to be in a site. It's not going to team site. It's not just going to disappear when the employee leaves, right? Because, of course, everything in OneDrive goes away when the employee leaves, and their OneDrive's gone.
Or yeah, it's hard to get. And I will also say to our listening audience, David made a really great point. So I'll just maybe do a plug. Like, all of our M365 customers, you have a OneDrive license. You should all have KFM or backup turned on and be storing things in the cloud. You know, if anything, to protect yourselves against ransomware attacks.
So David, I want to poke a little bit more on this. What are some of the strategies? And this, I'm going to potentially put myself in some hot water, because we've been actively discussing this of late. But what are some strategies Microsoft uses to kind of encourage people to put content in the right places?
Well, I think I mentioned a few things. One, I want those sites to be created with a label so that people understand the data delineation. People don't think about labeling every individual file. You shouldn't have to think about every individual file or unique permissions to every individual file. So part of it is helping people go, you know, I've got a set membership, a set roster who's going to have access to this stuff. and I've got a place for that. So I know my working group of people. I don't have to think about it and go, I need to share with these 5 people. And as we do this, as we go further, like one of the things we do is we allow company shareable links, for example, on SharePoint. So you know what? You want to share broadly, go share from SharePoint, right? And that's kind of for us the fundamental of we want people to share on OneDrive in a more targeted space, targeted way. But if you're doing more open sharing and you're doing planned sharing of your team, yeah, share from SharePoint and move a file from your OneDrive into a SharePoint site for ongoing engagement. And to be fair, people don't always get it right. I mean, I've got lots of files in my OneDrive, and I then think, oh yeah, I need to move this into SharePoint. But it's part of a grow up campaign and part of a process to say, look, I'm going to get people out. And again, this is where the defaults help this conversation. The whole construct of where do you have link sharing enabled for what purpose is really an important conversation. So what do you decide to do? Like, and I know not everyone wants company shareable links available. We make it available because we believe SharePoint is a perfectly fair game for company shareable links. Because again, I'd far rather someone, share a file with a company shareable link, in our case, people Microsoft, than someone accidentally grab some giant security group, drop it on a site somewhere, and then share it. Now suddenly it's available to everybody in the company.
Yeah, definitely. Now, this is where let's use your kind of company shareable links as an example. We are having active conversations about how Microsoft and the OneDrive team can help promote the right behavior for people. And so for Microsoft, one of the things we're exploring is, hey, do we change that, sharing default for OneDrives to be something that is a little bit more restrictive, make it a little bit easier to share with, a small set of people. But if you're looking to share broader, help encourage people to go to SharePoint, but still keep those abilities in OneDrive. So if people actually, actively need it, it's still available and so on. And there's a lot of layers of depth to it, which it's always a fascinating conversation to me.
And it's a balancing act too, because I think the main theme for me is I don't want to discourage that you have your OneDrive, you've got your file. I want files. It's better than the alternative, right? And so having files in your OneDrive is better than local to device, better than other storage. Having files on SharePoint is better than having them just on some team. It's better than just having it on OneDrive if I'm trying to share it with a company. My project is just stuff that's in a known location for a project. Better engagement, better partnership, all the rest of it.
Yeah. So that kind of brings us into, I think, what you've started calling the kind of pillars of asset governance, David. So how does Microsoft, what are the principles, I guess? How does Microsoft protect content effectively?
Well, how I think of it is, I mentioned earlier, I empower my employees to create things because at the end of the day, I want those different purpose-built sites as opposed to reusing sites. So let people create. I have rules around who can create, but every full-time employee who effectively has gone through training is allowed to create. But with that, I'm going to have lifecycle management. I'm going to hold you accountable. You created it. I'm going to basically say, do you still need this thing? I'm basically going to call an accountability check of who is the right person. I literally have ownership policies on SharePoint sites. I have 2 owners on SharePoint sites, for example, because I want to make sure I've got people that are accountable. Orphans for sites become a problem for IT. How do you get rid of that stuff? So we try to prevent orphans partially by making sure we've got multiple owners. But the other big theme here is, especially in the IT world, when you've got, I mentioned I got 700,000 SharePoint sites. How do I differentiate the ones that are fair game, being wide open to the entire company versus ones on some secret project? Well, for me, I have data delineation for that. So content labeling with Purview. So every site is labeled with a Purview sites and groups container label effectively. So that's label, like in our case, highly confidential being our top of the food chain, deep, highly sensitive content, being highly confidential, internal only, for example, being the label that says, yeah, you know what, you can't share the site with guests. You can't add guests to it at all. This is purely internal, and it's going to be locked down. But again, every SharePoint site in the company is going to be labeled. In fact, I literally, not only is Purview set for the mandatory labeling on SharePoint and groups and teams and everything else like that, like communities, but also we go one further to say we literally scan all of SharePoint and we find a site that's not labeled, we will delete that site. We will give you an owner warning, but then we'll delete it, as an example.
So I can blame you for all of the emails I get about sites that are being deleted.
I was just going to say, I keep getting those emails and I was like, hey, you still need this? Like, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, well, no, but that's the point, because here's the thing. When you think about it from an IT perspective, when you're dealing with volume of an organization of our size, how you don't want just dead wood sitting around. Your organization has principles of data retention and data expectations. And for us, I don't normally, like, people ask me, what's our retention policy? And I will normally say, I do an expiration policy, not a retention policy. meaning I will do an accountability check. If you're still accountable, I'll keep it. Now, I have sites, content of a tenant that's under retention because, contracts have to be kept 7 years, HR documents and for a given purpose. So there are sites under firm retention policies. But really, that's the 1% case. The vast majority of the time, I'm doing an expiration policy to do a check to say, is this still needed? And then getting rid of it. Because the more I have under retention, the harder it is to actually be able to manage data state cleanly. And really, there's a lot of nuance to how long someone wants to keep something. And so a firm retention policy for me is great for those very specific purposes, like legal, but like a contract, but not necessarily great for collaboration experiences.
And I have to say, as another example of maybe this is me not being the best, but you saving me. I've had so many sites that I will spin up because I was like, I need to test a feature. Let me spin up a site for, like, I literally had a site the other day that I got the email about that was like Stephen Bill test site. And it was literally like we were testing some at mention feature, I think. We're like, does this work? I don't know. Let's spin up a new site where neither of us has permission and see what happens. Tested it, completely forgot about it because it worked and good to go. And it's get that email and it's a matter of, we are good to go. Like it'll automatically delete. I don't have to worry about it. Thank you, David, for keeping me safe.
And keeping it clean, because how much stuff do you even want to have? Like when you look at all the stuff that you got, like, do you really want to look for all these things that really don't mean anything to you anymore? Does a company really should keep it? So, that's the other silo in this. And then I mentioned I kind of identify valuable content, but I have a trust and verify model. So I make you label your site. But obviously, Purview is DLP to watch for things. So, for us, every customer has their own kind of sensitive types that they care about the most. For us, passwords is one of those things, credentials. It's actually amusing and probably something I should be careful about. But, the people that will have a password in some file somewhere on SharePoint, in OneDrive, it exists and that happens. And we burn that out. We say, you know what, you're not supposed to do that. And we've gotten better about that over years. But that's something we look for as a company, as an example. So you say, look, it's general, but I say, well, no, it's actually going to be, I'm quarantining the file because guess what? It's got a password in it, as an example. So it's kind of a trust but verify protection model. And lastly, I mentioned the accountability side of, look, everything that exists, I'm going to make you not only reattest, but I mentioned earlier, I'll let you bring a guest in. So you bring joecontoso.com into your site. Maybe you share a file with Joe. Now, I need you to make sure you reattest. And one of the great things that we do use, we turn on the access reviews. So every site, every OneDrive, you're going to have to retest a guest every 6 months, right? And if you don't, that guest is wiped.
Makes sense. No, that's another example, I feel like, of the set of principles that Microsoft IT brings in, which is, like I said, you're allowed to work with guests, but you've been, added policies on a kind of reasonable time frame, 6 months, to ensure that people can collaborate. But if they forget, they don't unshare the content, whatever it might be, it will work by the end. They're safe and good to go.
Because what you don't want is forever access to stuff. You want people to think about it, especially when you bring in someone from outside. I mean, you can imagine Microsoft has lots of partnerships. We bring in the press sometimes for pre-announcements and visibility of things. You want to make sure that is removed in a timely way and retested. Should this person still be here? Archival is kind of an interesting topic for us because you think of it from a legal perspective. When you're trying to clean your data estate, if you're worried purely about costs, but you're happy to keep things, archive is great because it's going to lower your costs. You're going to keep the content that matters, but you don't really care about that much, but it's there.
It opens up an interesting question, David. So obviously you're kind of representing the Microsoft Digital kind of IT org. What are the other kind of key players that you work with that kind of make decisions or help guide decisions when it comes to implementing features, choosing what we use, choosing what settings we have, all that good stuff?
Yeah, no, it's important because I think any IT organization, you have lots of partnerships. I mean, we're in the organization that is effectively runs all the collaboration and productivity services. We have to work for our legal team. So in our case, corporate legal, like they have partnerships around what are our retention policies and e-discovery policies. And we work with legal around our privacy expectations. And of course, just like any customer, we've got data custodian rules from a privacy standpoint. What is that going to mean? How long do we keep data? All that stuff. And of course, we've got a very passionate, good partner security organization that we have to make sure that they're providing policies to us. We're enforcing those policies. They're helping us make sure we have, again, the trust but verify model. We're setting what the rules are with us. And then they also run things like Purview DLP. So they're actually scanning the tenant for issues. They're running things like endpoint protection to watch for, are you trying to copy something out of your OneDrive into some third-party service you're not allowed to, right? So we do all that on top. So again, Microsoft Digital has to work for both our security and our legal teams to pull this off. And just for good measure, we have to work with various business teams, like our communication team on things like Viva Amplify, and making sure we've got the right communication stories, and our HR team on how do we make sure some of these capabilities get rolled out that have HR implications sometimes.
And I've been in some of those discussions with security teams and the Microsoft IT team where I think it really underscores starting from, those principles you've kind of enumerated of empowering employees, protecting content. Because like the thing we often see is security teams are, nope, like let's twist the locks. Everything should be as locked down as possible. Legal wants to, go the extra mile on safety. And it's why I'll say, like, I'm very grateful for you and your team, David, because you are always advocating for how do we make sure people can get their jobs done while remaining secure, while remaining in compliance, and finding the center of a Venn diagram, whatever you want to call that area, the sweet spot.
And I think that's such a critical thing for IT to do. At the end of the day, if you're not providing an experience that your employees are able to just love and use, and it becomes an intuitive thing that's your, like the default state should also be the secure state. The desired state should be the secured state. But you want your IT path to be the right path, right? Effectively. So, we do a lot of focus to make sure that we are hopefully finding and threading that needle right. I mean, we're not always getting it right, but we're trying to balance security and legal pressures along with just data management and experience. And at the end of the day, we know that if our employees aren't really getting great value from our services, they're going to find work around us. I mean, as Microsoft employees, you're getting your job done one way or another. We want it to be on our services the right way.
So let's kind of go into, I know Microsoft has 7-ish recommendations, principles that, you follow and recommend for kind of other companies. So I wanted to kind of go through each of these one by one. So one of the things I know Microsoft recommends is intuitive labels. What does that mean, David? And what is the recommendation there?
So I mentioned earlier, we do things like using Purview labels for like highly confidential versus general versus public. And why I say intuitive is so critical is at the end of the day, Purview can provide policies. And I can say, yeah, this data can't be shared with guests. This other data is at full-time employee only, for example. So we can do a lot of things with labels. But quite frankly, labels are only as good as employees' application of them. If I don't know how to label something correctly, or I don't, worse yet, know how to use labeled data, then I'm going to take a highly confidential call in the Starbucks. I might talk about something that's highly confidential. Maybe I shouldn't. Culture is as important for technology in this case. And that's kind of what I mean by intuitive labels. So it's got to be just dead simple. Like one of the things we got wrong was we kind of had labels designed by committee. We literally had labels called like high business impact and medium business impact. And you think about that and you say, well, what is high business impact? And we literally had leaders who would come to us and go, I'm an important person. Therefore, everything I do is high business impact. It's like, it's not what that means, right? And it's that kind of situation that it's got to be dumb simple. Like when I say, internal only, confidential internal only, it means what it says. It's keep it inside the company. When it says public, it means it's public, right? The words have to be simple, and there shouldn't be too much choice. That's the other part here. That if you do a design by committee, you also potentially risk too much overload. Your IT, your CLO, your legal organization, your security organization have like this massive number of labels available to you, and all of different varieties of policies. And it's like if you make it too hard for employees to use, they're going to get it wrong, or they're not going to bother to do it at all. So that's what I mean by this.
There's an interesting lesson there, David, which is we like to all think of ourselves as very intelligent and smart people. And I have a feeling that you, as the person responsible for managing all of the dumb decisions that Arvind and I actually end up making, might have maybe a more realistic opinion of, I know what HBI is versus
LBI,
MBI,
I think.
I don't even know.
Yeah, I try to get that out of my memory, HBI, yeah.
Well, I mean, so we talked about intuitive labels. Like, there's also just making sure that the defaults are set up for people like myself. So it's path of least resistance.
Yeah.
Because I don't like to think very hard. So, can you talk about those?
Yeah, and I think there's two kind of flavors of this. One, I mentioned label your site, label your team. That's foundational for us because, quite frankly, employees aren't going to label every individual file, and I don't expect them to. But you know what? If you're working on a highly confidential project, you're working on a tented project of some kind that's labeled, guess what? The file defaults in that library should be highly confidential, right? It should be set to match. So that's one of the things we do. We set up with Purview, and now SharePoint has document library labels that defaults that can also, one of the things that's rolling out is deriving from Purview container labels or site labels. So it gives you the ability now to just say, look, I've got this highly confidential site, means highly confidential files, things like that. The other part here, even for OneDrive, right, where, I don't label OneDrive as a holistic collection because it's a mixed bag. It's a bunch of stuff, right? But I default label. So one of the things we do for OneDrive specifically is we say confidential Microsoft extended. So for us, that means keep to a tenant, right? One of the things I'm planning on doing at some point is actually renaming that MS extended label to be just internal only, but we're not there yet. Again, intuitive labels. Sometimes our history means we have labels that aren't quite intuitive yet. But MS Extended for us is that intro-only label, and that is our default for OneDrive. And so the point is, again, it's a medium-grade label. It means don't share with guests. If you leave it behind on a device or try to email it around outside the company, it won't work, which is exactly by design. If you want to do that, relabel it. And so that's for us the big theme of most of the time employees aren't going to label. I always say 95% of the time, labels are going to inherit from a default. People are going to leave it. 4% of the time, people are going to manually label to be different. 1% of the time, DLP is going to come in and catch it and go, you know what? I found a password. I found a credit card number. Yes, great. We're going to relabel it for you. But that's really the 1% case, not the 95% case.
Yeah, and that definitely sounds like kind of this third recommendation around, you've talked about trust but verify, making sure.
Exactly.
Hey, why is that file that contains passwords labeled as general? That doesn't seem right. Let's make sure we fix that.
Exactly. And we have a lot of different DLP policies and scanning of everything that exists on the tenant. And of course, it's absolutely critical to get right. But again, if you're going to let your employees do things and share things, especially externally, that verify becomes a part of the equation to say, I'm going to trust you, but I'm going to watch over your shoulder and make sure the right thing is happening. And if I catch it, I can fix it. So we can quarantine, we can auto label and said, if I find a password, depending upon what it is, we'll either quarantine the thing so it will be locked for no access, or we'll set it to highly confidential, recipients only, so no one but the file owner, for example, or people with direct access can get it. So, we do things like that to lock us down.
So much talk about labels. My head's spinning. It's not something I think about all the time. So how fundamental is it for folks like myself, to get trained up on all this stuff?
Well, so I think one of the things we do is we provide all company training. In fact, every employee, you probably saw the training we rolled out 6 months ago. Everyone had to do the latest one was on how to label meetings, and what are labeling meetings, and how does it intersect with files? Because again, you don't take a highly confidential call in the Starbucks kind of deal, right? I think those are all important things. Like, again, helping employees get the it right is really important. That's why the culture aspect of this is so critical, right? So yes, training is a big aspect of all this.
And so we're lucky enough to have films that and training and whatnot. So, but not all companies are going to have the same resources as us. So what would you recommend for that?
Well, some of it, again, keep things from intuitive as possible. But again, one of the nice things that the labeling model provides are tooltips. So guess what? That as you're selecting the label tooltips should hopefully mean something. People understand what it means, get more info, have a good link for where all this stuff is. Our tech web, which is our IT portal, effectively, we have this MS Protect site where all this information lives around what labels mean, how to use them, deeper definitions if you really want to drill in. How do I determine, well, is this confidential or highly confidential? How do you think through those decisions? Like, we have all that information available, but quite frankly, it starts with really simple tooltip, and it better be easy, right? I mean, that's the whole point.
Yeah. This is the part where it always feels like it's planned. Like, hey, how do I communicate to people about what my labels are? Oh, well, there's this product called SharePoint, which lets you build portals that let you communicate things to people. How do you run campaigns? Oh, there's this thing called Amplify that also does things like that. It's weird that Microsoft 365 is designed to work together.
Exactly. And, it's a really cool thing because our communicators can get the messaging out there. They can have a community on Viva Engage. Back to the tech web. You have questions for IT? Great. Ask us and Engage, right?
The other thing I think you've talked about a little bit, but really, I imagine shines through is none of this is set in stone. How often does Microsoft kind of revisit our setup, our policies, our recommendations?
Well, it's a good question. I think we continue to make the label policies better, and more capabilities keep coming out and make it even more advanced. And so we continue to reimagine how do we make it simpler. Like I mentioned, that MS extended label. Is that intuitive? No, we will change it. But, it takes time to change labels like that on the tenant because obviously you've got a lot of content that's labeled already. So we'll be careful about doing things like that. But at the same time, yeah, we do revisit to try to go, how do we make it simple? Not to mention the fact that one of the things I didn't mention is, different divisions may have different kind of experiences. Like LinkedIn is a good example. Have LinkedIn only labels so that if you want to keep something just for LinkedIn employees, not available to the rest of Microsoft, they're on our tenant, but they want to hide something for the rest of the company, they can do that. Label their stuff as LinkedIn only, highly confidential LinkedIn only, and no one else will see it, right? No one wants to be able to open it, even if I did see it.
Yeah. Final thoughts, David, that, if you could communicate advice for our customers and other IT pros, like what should they take away? What's your secret wisdom?
Yeah, I think I go back to, you've got to open things up, let employees use it, but you have to have the compensating controls for that trusted verify model. You also want to have an understanding of your data state. Like the thing I didn't really talk about is just watching for how much sharing you have on your tenant. What does that look like? The SharePoint Advanced Management now capabilities, for example, and the graph data connectability to extract all that inventory. We use that. I can say exactly where does Joe Contoso have access to my tenant. I can say what OneDrives or sites have something shared with more than 5,000 people, right? We do that because that way I can say, where do I have something that's labeled as highly confidential with some large security group shared to it, right? We can find that. So again, letting employees do their thing, but have enough controls to be able to watch, monitor, and manage. And that's why I say it's self-service with guardrails. And I think that's a really important model. It provides safety, and it also sets us up well for success with things like Copilot. Because now I can say, you know what, you ask a question for Copilot, I'm not going to be scared that it's going to provide too much oversharing. Because guess what? I know exactly where I've got oversharing on my tenant. We look for that. I know exactly where I've got data delineation because I got labeling.
It's, to me, it sounds like it's a balance ultimately. Like, you want to give your employees like the best user experience, but at the same time, you want to keep everything secure. And if a company like Microsoft can do it, like, so can you. But David, listen, we just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. I feel like I've learned a lot in an area that I literally know nothing about, but I feel like that much smarter about it now. Just so folks, where can they find out more about you or reach out to you?
Well, we have a lot of Inside Track articles and at the aka.ms/Inside Track. And we've got articles there. I also have sessions or another session at the Microsoft 365 conference coming up in May. I'm excited about that, about how do we manage and govern our data estate for Copilot. So lots of ways to get a hold of me and learn. Yeah.
This is kind of like the abbreviated version of your session from last year's M365 conference. So I'm excited to see what your next one is. It's always exciting. For those of us who are listening right now, if you want to learn more about OneDrive and get the latest and greatest, you can check out the blog at aka.ms/OneDrive/blog. David gets to talk to us more regularly because David is, inside the company. But if you're outside the company, but you want to talk to us, that is what our OneDrive office hours are for at aka.ms/OneDrive/office hours. That is usually the third Wednesday of every month, and we would love to have you all there. You can find me at LinkedIn at srice08 and Arvind Mishra at Arvind Mishra1.
And as always, we love hearing from you, our listeners. And so you can always reach us on Twitter via our handle, which is @OneDrive. And if you've got a question, just tag it with #SyncUp. You can visit our page for links, resources, and more at aka.ms/SyncUp.
And you can always send us emails directly at syncupquestions@microsoft.com. Don't forget to subscribe to Sync Up wherever you get your podcasts. If you enjoy it, tell your friends. Word of mouth is the best way to get people engaged and help us grow the show. If you're curious about other Microsoft podcasts, you should check out aka.ms/Microsoft/podcasts. There's a lot of great content there, like Intrazone with Mark Cashman, which is always a pleasure to listen to.
Always great.
As always, also a huge thanks to Lisa for making this podcast possible.
Woo-hoo! Thank you for listening to Sync Up. We've been your hosts, Stephen and Arvind, and we'll catch up with you next month.